Now it is again my pleasure and honor to welcome Mr. Gabriel Bernardino, who is the chair and has been the chair since the foundation of EIOPA, the European Insurance and Pensions Authority, and he has accepted kindly to answer a few questions from Betetr Finance and EURSF. So, welcome, Gabriel. Very nice to have you here. And as you heard, we are celebrating as well today the 10-year anniversary of Betetr Finance, the European Federation of Investors and Financial Services Users, together with our Romanian member organization, EURSF. And I wanted first to ask you, before quizzing you on some important financial user protection issues in Europe and in Romania, do you believe it is important to sustain EU support for the involvement of people like us, financial services users, in the EU financial policy making? As you know, for the last 10 years, we have been trying to build let's say, a counterweight to the financial industry lobby, because it's good to have both. What is your view?
Yeah, good. No, good morning to all of you, and thanks a lot, Guillaume, and thanks to Betetr Finance, of course, for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be in here. It's fantastic room, really beautiful, and really congratulations to the faculty here. It's really a unique room, so really a privilege to be in here. Now, on your question, you know that I've been long supporter of having this balanced approach from a stakeholder perspective, and I really think that it's very important for us in terms of regulation and supervision in the financial sector to have both views. And I used to say that, of course, for me it's very easy to understand and to know the view of the industry, because I don't need to invite them; they come to me for sure. So that's what happens all the time. We need also, in order to balance, of course, policy and to have the public objective, of course, as it is at the top of our priorities, we need to have a counterbalance, and we need to have different interests. And I know how difficult it is, of course, for the civil society, to have the capacity, the knowledge, the resources to provide, of course, good input. So to have this aggregated at European level and to have, of course, access to funding by the EU to have a proper balancing act, it's quite important, and really appreciate a lot during these years the context, the interactions. We don't agree all the time, but I really enjoy and having the perspective from the users and from the savers and investors on policy. So I wish you all to continue, and by the way, congratulations, 10th anniversary, of course.
Thank you, Gabriel, and I must say that I could witness your wish and your will to balance the influence of users versus industry. Well, not versus, because sometimes, of course, we are in agreement. We are not always in agreement, that's true, but I can say that you have been doing a great job at EIOPA, and so we are happy that you are still there. We have, of course, several key issues, and we cannot discuss all of them today, especially if we want to save a few minutes for one or two questions from the audience. But I have three major points, and you tell me which ones you want to address first. The first one, as you may know, you will not be surprised, we have been fighting since the beginning for comparable, fair, and non-misleading information. I'm quoting MiFID or IDD, the rules for insurance or for investment, and in particular on the topic of actual performances and costs, and EIOPA recently released its first report on this. And so what, in your view, can be done to get closer to this goal?
No, that's a very important part of the work, and I must say that I think a lot has been already done from a regulatory perspective. Now we need, of course, to put these things in practice and to benefit also from it and to have it in a consistent way. I think there are a couple of principles that we need to make sure that we achieve. And one is, of course, to have comparability and consistency. And for that, the more I work with these areas, the more I think that standardization is fundamental. Standardization of definitions of cost, standardizations in the way and the methodologies to calculate performance is an essential element. And it is an essential element not only for, of course, consumers to compare it, but also, to be honest, I think it's an essential element from a competitiveness point of view for the industry, because we don't have, in reality, and especially in the insurance sector, where there's, of course, very different types of very complex savings products with very different types of structures, we don't have that consistency right now in the regulatory framework. And that was clear in the recent report that we have published on cost and performance, and we knew that that was the reality, definitely, because it showed that when we tried to collect data from different member states and different companies on the different types of products in terms of the cost and performance, first, not so much data is available. That's the first thing. So national authorities, by the way, they don't have so much data on this. There are inconsistencies, not only throughout Europe, but to be honest, even within the same country, there are inconsistencies because there is no standardization of some of these elements. And so the report that we published, of course, reflects those difficulties. We really tried to put, a lot of effort in that. I think there's already some good elements there, but I think we should do much better. What have we done concretely now to really move forward? We are starting to work on much more concrete definition on the cost side, to have concrete definitions and to have everybody, disclosing cost information in the same way. We have asked the Actuarial Association of Europe to help us defining methodologies, consistent methodologies for the performance calculation, especially for in life insurance products which have participation features, which are much more complex, of course, to have a performance methodology than, for example, unit linked, where you have the units value, which is easier. My vision for the future, my vision is to also help this comparability in a way that consumers throughout Europe can have access to this information in a much more easier way. And I think today, with new technologies, with digitalization, etc., we can do that in a really efficient way. So my vision is, and that's what I want to implement, by the way, for the PEP, is to have a website, public website, where you will have, for all the products, the costs and the performance in a standardized way that consumers can go there, can look at it, can make it on their own decisions, and then can go deeper, of course, in the analysis, because, of course, there can be, and there are different costs and different performance according to risk and return considerations. But to have this in a simple, standardized, easy way to access, I think it's fundamental. That's the vision. We're working towards that.
Thank you, Gabriel. And these keywords you mentioned, comparability, standardization, better access to information and comparison for individual is music to our ears, and it gives me the opportunity to tell you that in your folder you have our 10 priorities for the next 5 years, where all these key actions are mentioned. So I am very happy to see that EIOPA and Betetr Finance are looking in the same direction. And this afternoon, the European Parliament is having its final vote on the pan-European personal pension, and that's clearly a way to standardize and hopefully simplify personal pension products, and soon then we will have them on a public website, thanks to EIOPA. Good. Next question, you mentioned unit-linked, which may be, it may be more easier to assess the performance, but still it has been a problematic issue in terms of selling, and I would say of mis-selling throughout Europe, including in Romania. And I know that EIOPA has been looking into it, especially last year, but it's really been too often detrimental selling to individuals, and I would like to know the lessons learned on this by EIOPA and how can we make sure such mis-selling does not happen again.
Yeah. Now that's a very important element, and allows me also to mention the kind of two phases in terms of development that we have been, of course, moving. The first phase was, of course, the more regulatory focused one. We were confronted when we started in 2011 with a situation where definitely that the European landscape, the consumer protection rules were really, really minimal. And so there was really an effort that was needed to really elevate the level of consumer protection rules in Europe. I think that that was done, you know, probably not to the extent of, for example, the advice that EIOPA gave in some of these areas, like the Insurance Distribution Directive, like the PRIPS. But I think that we have now, you know, to be put in place as we speak, new rules at the European level that I think bring completely different aspects in terms of consumer protection. You know, when we talk about the requirements on product oversight and governance by the different companies, that really has a responsibility of the board on the type of products that they put in the market. And unit link, of course, it's a fundamental one, especially making sure that these products are sold to the target markets, to the people that really need them, and that they are appropriate for those kinds of people. Also a focus in terms of the conflicts of interest that you have in the selling process of these products. And again, in unit linked, it's very clear that there is you know, a potential conflict of interest due to the distribution models that exist. Some of them very much focused, of course, on commissions that you know, have a huge incentive to sell certain types of products to certain target markets. So now we have the rules there, and so I think that we are at the beginning of a completely different phase, which is the phase of implementation and supervision. And that's the focus that we have now from EIOPA already for, I would say, more than 1 year, also on the conduct of business side. And let me say a few words about that, because I think it's very important, not only for consumers, but definitely for the industry and for supervisors, by the way. We really need to make sure that we do better implementation of the rules and better supervision of the rules. I think that this is an issue that all of us as Europeans we have. We are very good in, I would say, making rules. We are not so good in making sure that they are implemented in a consistent way and that they are supervised. So that's my focus already for some time. That's where the emphasis that we have at EIOPA on what we call our conduct of business supervision strategy, where we're focusing making sure that there is supervisory convergence throughout Europe, also on the conduct of business side, and that it's really the importance of supervisors also having the capacity to monitor the market, monitor the products that are sold, and to intervene, because there are tools right now with this regulation. And so this is the fundamental thing right now, and surprise, surprise, in terms of implementation from our side, unit linked was defined as the priority, because of course we see that it's growing throughout Europe. We see, of course, as you said, here and there some mis-selling scandals. You know, some years ago in the UK, in the Netherlands, there were issues in Romania, in Poland, in Slovenia, etc. So we're, of course, you know, learning with those elements. Now we have regulation, and we want, of course, supervisors to dedicate attention to this. But let me just also make a point in here. The first responsibility is with the boards of the companies. And don't forget that, you know, that's what we expect. We want, of course, that the boards of the companies take appropriate responsibility in the products that they put outside in the markets. But of course, supervision will also change. And that is an area where we're doing a lot of work. EIOPA started to do visits to national authorities, also on conduct of business supervision, something that we were doing on the prudential side, on the more solvency side already for 2-3 years. We started last year, we're continuing this year and increasing. We're looking at the practices that the different supervisors have on conduct of business. And I can tell you, it's a patchwork. It's not consistent. You know, you have supervisors that have much more attention to conduct of business issues, supervisors that do on-site supervision, supervisors that do mystery shopping analysis, supervisors that are much more, I would say, proactive and risk-based, also on conduct of business side, and supervisors that are well behind the curve. So this is a point that we are taking very strongly. I can tell you now, one of the things that I put in place is that since already last year, in every board of supervisors meeting with the responsible people for our supervision throughout Europe, in every board of supervisor meeting of EIOPA, there are discussions about conduct of business issues, be it in terms of strategy, of policy, or already in concrete issues of companies. We're discussing concrete issues of cross-border, for example. Unit-linked is an area where there's a lot of cross-border selling throughout Europe. So we need leadership also from the supervisory side in making sure that conduct of business supervision is taken seriously. And believe me, that from our side is there, and I'm really using all my strength to make sure that we evolve in the next 2 years. And I sincerely hope also that in the banking and the security side, we can see the same movement, because this should be something done within the financial sector overall.
Thank you, Gabriel. In fact, starting from unit-linked, you expanded into the last question I wanted to ask you about, is to have how to have a much more consistent protection of financial services users across Europe. And I share your comment that I think we are much more advanced on the regulatory side than on the enforcement side. For example, I used to say that this rule in MiFID, which says that information should be fair, clear, and not misleading, is the least enforced rule I have ever seen in terms of user protection. Also, you mentioned that you got new powers. There is an ESAS reform that is being completed. You mentioned, to have an appropriate product oversight and governance with target markets, but sometimes there are no appropriate markets when a product is toxic, meaning that for Betetr Finance, it has an extremely low probability of providing positive real value at some point to investors. So EIOPA last year got product intervention powers. Also, that's first part of my question, what are you going to do with that? And second, you mentioned the role, and we fully agree with you, of the boards of companies. What about the boards and the governance of national supervisors? I'm sorry if the question is a bit brutal, but what is your view on this point?
Yeah, let me just start with the last one, because it links what I was saying. I think that there's clearly a need also from a tone from the top, also in supervisory authorities. And I've been also clear on this. I think that we need also to make sure that all supervisory authorities throughout Europe really understand and give the due priority in terms of allocation of resources, in terms of course, the priorities to this area. And this is an issue also that links with the capacity and the resources of the supervisory authorities. Let's be honest also. It's not that very often, it's not that the supervisors don't want to do properly their job, is that they have so many competing elements to touch upon that they need to prioritize. And what we need to make sure is that there is, of course, an appropriate prioritization of this work. And so we're moving definitely in that direction. At least from our side, the message is very clear. I cannot be more clear. I can tell you publicly and also privately with the different colleagues around my table. Secondly, in terms of the new powers and product intervention, I think that that's really a key area, and I think that we need, of course, to move from a situation where we had before, which was that the focus on protection of consumers was mainly put in terms of the point of sale and the disclosures, which it's an important element, but let's be honest, I think that the reality shows that it doesn't solve all the problems. On the contrary, I think we continue to have mis-selling cases even with all the disclosures, so we can improve the disclosures, but we need to have other types of tools. And now, I think from a regulatory perspective, we have them there. What we need to do is to have a process in place where supervisors also have a good way to assess the risks from a conduct perspective, and to have a market monitoring to understand what are the products that are being sold and what are the characteristics of those products, and to prioritize the work. So that's what we started at EIOPA. We published recently a paper that I think it's a very good one in terms of how to assess conduct risks and the different areas and how to do that from within a good framework. We are doing what we call retail risk indicators, where we look at different indicators that we receive, of course, in terms of information to try to prioritize areas to work upon. And one of the things that we decided at our board at the end of last year was to have a first try on a conduct risk dashboard. Because we have risk dashboards for many areas, in financial instability, in solvency. We want to do it also from a conduct of business perspective. And actually, the pilot exercise that we're going to do, it's on unit linked, so we're starting to do that right now. And on top of that, what we're doing right now, it's also to go on to concrete cases and to look at product characteristics and to start to have really a basis for the discussion of where potential consumer detriment is coming. And this is a very difficult and tough discussion, but we're putting it on the table. We're starting this with the national authorities. We need to have, of course, a robust process to do that, because to intervene in the market, you really need to have strong reasons to do that. But I can tell you, I cannot say more into detail right now, but I can tell you that we are following that. We're having the appropriate discussions, and at some point in time, things will come also in that area.
Thank you very much, and we can help in this identification of potential consumer detriment.
Can I say one thing on that? Because one of the things that I think consumer associations, user associations, Betetr Finance could do to help us, it's precisely that. You have members in many, many countries throughout Europe. It's impossible for us to understand what is happening, in all the markets at all the time. We, of course, receive information from national authorities, but of course, these things always have a lag. So it will be very important if you could, also serve as a forum to highlight to us emerging elements, because that's the real change that we need to have also in this area. It's that supervision needs to become much more preventive. We cannot arrive to the issues only when the house is already burning and when, consumers have already a detriment. I know it's difficult because it will always have an element of judgment. And that's difficult, of course, but we need to do that. So we would really, encourage you to see, when you see, be it practices or products that are put out there in the market, where you have real concerns in terms of potential detriment for consumers, tell us. But please tell us before they already have huge detriment to consumers.
Thank you. I would have many more questions, yes, but we have, I think, time for one or two questions from the audience.
So, Ați vorbit despre responsabilitatea pe care ar trebui să o aibă companiile și mediul privat, despre măsuri de prevenție înainte de a lua foc casa și de a se întâmpla lucruri care afectează consumatorii. Ce te faci când guvernul unei țări ia însă o măsură, precum Ordonanța de Urgență 114 din decembrie 2018, când fără consultări s-a suprataxat mediul privat, cu siguranță știți despre această ordonanță de urgență, acționarii companiilor, acționarii administratorilor fondurilor de pensii au venit la București să vorbească cu guvernul. Companiilor practic li se cereau să vină cu 800 de milioane de euro în acest an, jumătate din sumă până la jumătatea acestui an, fără consultări, fără nimic. Autoritatea Națională de Supraveghere Financiară a dat aviz pozitiv, nu a spus o clipă despre amendamente, practic un pur executant. Care este poziția EIOPA la nivel european? Sunteți la curent cu aceste lucruri? Ați făcut ceva demersuri? Ați atras atenția? Ați dat vreun semnal autorităților? Care este poziția dumneavoastră? Mulțumesc.
Yeah. Well, if I understand well, I think that this relates to the what we call first pillar biz pension system in Romania. You know, unfortunately, we are not responsible for this area. This in a number of member states, these reforms in the pension system were implemented through the putting in place these mechanisms of pensions that are part of the first pillar social security, so the public part. EIOPA is only competent on insurance and occupational pensions, so the private part. And I can tell you one thing, and without, of course, entering into any details on the concrete situation in Romania that I don't know in detail. But I remember in the past receiving letters from European consumers in different countries asking precisely the type of questions that you're putting. And believe me, it was one of the most difficult situations for me because, you know, I hate to say that I'm not competent to deal with a certain issue. The reality is that it's not in our field, we cannot do anything, but I really believe that this is an important element and that, of course, you know, sound governance of all pension mechanisms should be in place. And that's what we hope, and that's why I fight it a lot to have the PEP in place, you know, to have sound European rules, a sound framework where consumers can have trust in private pensions. Unfortunately, in this situation, this is done through, you know, the public systems. We don't have any competence in this area.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. We are having to manage time, so I'm sorry we cannot take any more questions, but please join me in thanking Gabriel, who's been, as usual, for a European supervisor, quite clear and quite direct. Thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you.